Again, welcome everybody. Looks like we have about 41 people on right now. I'm really excited that our learning community now has over 300 people. And this webinar, as with all of the others, will be recorded and people will be able to access it into perpetuity. This webinar is hosted by the OHSU, ESA Center for Excellence, and Stanford University Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences in the partnership with the National Technical Assistance Network for Children's Behavioral Health, operated through the University of Maryland and funded and supported by SAMHSA. So I see that folks are introducing themselves in the chat. That's really great, so I encourage everyone to do so. Say where you're from and who you are. And I really appreciate so many familiar names and, in some cases, faces. Again, this is an ongoing learning community. We're doing monthly webinars. The next one is going to be on social marketing with Bill McFarlane and Sarah Lynch from the Peer Program. So I'm expecting that to be really kind of exciting and interesting. And in the meantime, we're going to start having lots of opportunities for people to upload and share and ask questions in the meantime. So let's go ahead and introduce ourselves. I'm really excited about the folks that we have online today. Angela? Let's see, and Angela, we can't hear you, so you might have to unmute. All right, so we might be having some connectivity issues with Angela. Let's go ahead and have Michael. You want to introduce yourself? Let's see, so I am not hearing. Are people hearing me?
Yep, we can hear you. So let's go ahead and start with Caitlin. I think Angela and Michael are having some audio issues, so I'm going to work to get them back on.
All right, so Caitlin, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Caitlin Baird. I'm a program manager at Portland State University, working with the Pathways Research and Training Center on projects that are specific to youth and young adult mental health, as well as youth peer support. I myself also have a lot of experience as a youth peer support specialist and someone who supervised youth peer support specialists, and working with youth and families on wraparound teams to help bring youth voice to the table. And I'm really pleased to be here today.
Great, great. So Tiara, do you have a sense of what's going on with the audio for Angela and Michael?
Yeah, we have Michael back on, so he is ready to go.
Great. Okay, Michael, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hello, my name is Michael Haynes. I am the lead peer support specialist for the ESA program in Eugene, Oregon. And previously I was a participant of the ESA program.
And Angela? No? Okay, so we'll come back around to having Angela introduce herself. I see that Kate Hardy is also online, who's one of the co-instructors. So welcome, Kate, as well as the other folks who are online. Let's go ahead and just have people, again, introduce yourselves and just identify, are there questions you have about youth participation that are on your mind?
What's the last 4 digits of my number?
Guys, hearing you.
Could you ask me anything?
Okay, so we're hearing.
Yeah, we have some background noise, so it sounds like we have some folks on. Angela, it sounds like you may be on, so I just want to remind everyone to mute their computer speakers just to get rid of that background noise. And Angela, if you can hear me, do you mind letting us know if you're on the line?
Sure. This is Angela Kimball. I'm the National Director of Advocacy.
Oh, yeah, sorry guys.
Give us one moment. Okay,
right,
Angela, go ahead and speak now. Okay. So we're going to work in the background to get her back on. So let's go ahead and transition over to the polls. I have the polls up for you, Tamara.
Great. Okay. So we want to know kind of who's here today. So if you could identify what perspective you affiliate with, that would be interesting and useful.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, we sure can.
All right. Sorry for the problems, everyone. This is Angela Kimball. I'm the National Director of Advocacy and Public Policy at NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And I'm here as a parent of an adult son who lives with a mental health condition. He was hospitalized twice last year with psychosis, and I'm very excited to be part of this conversation today.
Great. Thank you, Angela. So we just have people kind of sharing who they are. It looks like we've got a number of folks who are clinicians, a couple of peer support specialists, some administrators, not a lot of young adults or family members. So maybe we can make that a goal that next time that will be a higher number. So if folks could also, if there are things that you would like to learn, questions that you have for the conversation today, go ahead and type those into the chat box as well. And I see there's an interest in kind of working with Hispanic families, how to engage teens and their families effectively, what have sites done to address transportation issues and engaging family and youth. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and I think we will definitely touch on a number of those questions, and we'll also have an opportunity to have some dialogue at the end. How to have the conversation about experience without labeling or pathologizing. Great. Okay. Thank you. So. Today we're going to talk about kind of the, obviously why it's important to include young adults and families in decision making at all levels, identify some really specific methods and opportunities for engaging youth and families in decision making, and we'll try to, kind of keep a frame on that is really inclusive of the wide range of cultures and experiences. Discussing the differences between clinical high-risk family and youth perspectives versus folks who are in more of a first episode, and then identify some tools that folks can use going forward. And so Angela is going to go ahead and get us started.
All right, so I wanted to talk a little bit about participatory decision-making and the importance of doing that. And first, I just want to mention that the strengths and goals of young adults, not their challenges, are what are really helpful to have as the primary focus of planning and treatment. And somebody was talking about not pathologizing, and I wanted to say that I know that my son never wanted to be defined by a diagnosis or even being at risk. So what's been really important to him is to be engaged around what he wants out of life and what's getting in the way. And just one story from when he was in high school, I mentioned that he really wanted a job. He wanted something meaningful to do. And I knew that because he had an IEP and was nearing the end of high school, he was entitled to some vocational assistance. And they started searching. Then they met with my son. And, he came home from school in tears and announced that special education had found him a job folding napkins in a sheltered workshop. And he turned to me and he said, "Is that all that they think I can do?" And it still breaks my heart. And fortunately, it didn't break his spirit. And he went on to apply successfully to art school. So that didn't deter him. But it is that planning around what people believe in their own selves, their own goals for the future that are so important. And from a family perspective, it's also important to be considered to be part of that decision making. I want to mention that youth and young adults often rely or would like to rely on their family for things like housing, financial support, transportation, case management, and frankly, the relationship. Regardless of what kind of relationship that family relationship is, it endures forever. Families just never stop being family. So it's important to help everybody be the best they can, despite experiences that, frankly, I'm going to just tell you, would drop most people to their knees. And I want to mention that in our society, we place incredibly high currency on being a so-called good parent. And we praise and blame families for the success or failure of their children. So if I could say anything, I would just say that assume that any family coming to you who has a child, young adult, who's struggling may already feel the burden of being blamed or of failure. And this sense of failure on the part of failures and the embarrassment, the shame they may often feel for behaviors that they don't understand and they can't control, it's really palpable. And families react in different ways. You know, sometimes you get anger and frustration, others grief, withdrawal, over-control, being very compliant. You name it, the gamut of reactions is there. But just understand that families want to be involved, and they will be processing something that's incredibly difficult, as is the young adult. So something to bear in mind. I could add that instead of diagnosing the family, helping families draw on their unique strengths to navigate something no one ever thought they were going to have to deal with is really important. Let them know about the strengths that you see. And it's helpful to be creative. My son really admires one of his uncles, who's also an artist, and his uncle could say things to him that I really couldn't. And I'm a mom. There's conflict, you know, with your children. It just comes with the job. And instead of blaming them for conflict, you know, ask them if there are other relatives or family friends who can help navigate tricky issues or situations. This is just a really helpful way to help everybody focus on strengths and gain resilience throughout this journey. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tamara.
Thank you, Angela. Yes, I think what you're talking about is really a nice illustration of just the importance of really trying to build a culture that's focused on self-determination, helping people to kind of find meaning in their own experience. And as we've developed the ESA program, we've really tried to think about people with lived experience, the young people and the families that we work with as kind of the owners of the system. So, really trying to prioritize and provide services that are aligned with, the things that people really care about. So things like, words like, there's nothing we can do till the person's an imminent threat to themselves or others, or, you'll never go to college or something like that, or words that are literally forbidden in our program. So I want to back up a little bit and kind of ask Michael as well to talk about your experience as you've kind of evolved through the ESA program. And, as we talk about participatory decision-making, we're really looking at a range of levels of participation. So that includes, that one-on-one involvement with clinicians, helping the local agency to do things like evaluate their services, being on hiring committees, giving feedback about, the types of services that are being made available, and then also involving young adults and families in, all the different aspects, assessment, goal setting, feedback-informed care, and then at the system level, really kind of changing the way the whole system works with, folks who experience psychosis in terms of the language and the resources that are available. So Michael, can you introduce yourself a little bit in terms of the experiences that you've had and kind of how you've seen those evolve over time?
Yeah, certainly. My relationship with the ESA program has evolved over time. I first entered, like I said, as a participant of the ESA program. And before doing so, I experienced prodromal symptoms for about a year. And so had I been connected with the ESA program much sooner, I think it would have changed a lot of things. And I would also like to say that I was somebody who was told by the emergency department that there was nothing that could be done. In the ESA program, I happened to be a part of a fidelity review as a focus group participant and was able to give direct feedback to Tamara yourself and people from the Center of Excellence. While in the ESA program, I moved counties and received support from that other county. Then I went to a conference where I was connected with other young adults and was able to join the Young Adult Leadership Council. And having that opportunity to connect with people who understood my experience and to give direct feedback that positively changed the entire statewide program really made a positive impact. And then from there, I became connected to even other opportunities nationally, having the opportunity to speak at a variety of conferences. Now I began working at Peace Health as a peer support, and I've moved into a supervisory role. Here in our ESA program, we have not only the ESA program, but also the CHR grant.
Great, thanks. So you have worn so many different hats, so it's really helpful having you here to share the insights that you've developed. So as we talk about really building robust participation and shared decision-making over time at all these different levels, I think it's helpful for us to go back to the CASP principles, or the system of care principles, which many of you are familiar with. But Angela, do you want to run through these real quick?
Sure. So the CASP principles are based on strengths and needs across life domains. They're on your screen. Determined through shared decision-making processes with both youth and family. They're flexible and continuous, community-based, planned in collaboration with all the systems that are involved with the child, culturally competent, and focused on the least restrictive, least intrusive venue possible. And I think these CASP principles are something that have really helped families and youth feel very involved and in control of their treatment and the whole process. And unfortunately, that hasn't necessarily carried over into systems and programs that serve young adults. And I think one of the wonderful things about early psychosis programs and clinical high risk is this ability to focus on strengths and carry some of these CASP principles forward, so that we're working with young adults and families at older ages, but still with these same concepts. And I think that's critical because, again, families don't end their involvement or don't want to end their involvement, and frankly, young adults need their families as they go down this journey. One of the things that makes things tougher, I think, as we're talking about young adults, is first of all, we're talking about a system that's not built to step in and help at an adult level unless you're a danger to self or others, which isn't really helpful for recovery. And one of the things that happens is families are often put in a position where, in order to get somebody some help, somebody who is having some severe symptoms and challenges with their life, often have to present that individual in the worst possible terms to treatment professionals, usually at a hospital or emergency room. And yet that's not who you want to be as a supportive parent. And sometimes it's even hard to switch gears, for some people. So understanding that the system really forces people to do and say things that aren't necessarily helpful is sort of key to bear in mind. Another thing is that, there's a tremendous amount of co-occurring substance use disorder with mental health conditions. And frankly, families, often are wondering, hey, is this the substance use disorder? Is this the mental health condition talking? Is this, just normal independence talking? And families are hungry to know, should I be setting limits here, or should I be more understanding? They're struggling with so many emotions and not knowing what is the right response. And the value of embracing the CASP principles here is it's really about inviting families and youth, young adults, into having a dialogue both together and separately, and understanding what is everybody dealing with, and how can you help them deal with what they're experiencing on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you, Angela. So, I think that, really recognizing that these are the underlying principles, both for, the children's system of care, wraparound, transition age youth wraparound services that are out there, as well as the early psychosis programs. And, unless we really start out the conversation with a sincere conversation about strengths and what people perceive that they need and what they think is going to be helpful, there's a real potential for doing harm. And as you're saying, right now the system is set up in many ways to force people to present themselves in a way that's really going against their own self-interest. So that's why it's important to get involved at so many different levels. And Michael, do you want to jump in? Let's see. Yeah.
Certainly. And so this slide, it's important to also look at the young adult and family's voice. My experience in being able to give feedback on the Young Adult Leadership Council, which was formed in April 2013, really helped, I feel like, to progress and move the ESA program forward. But on all areas of the program, people can give valuable feedback looking at participatory decision-making and practice guidelines, training, fidelity reviews. One thing that we recently held a focus group, and one thing that came from that was the importance of early identification. They went months without knowing what was happening, and I can say, in my experience as well, I had a whole year where I wasn't connected with anybody, and then when I went to the emergency department, they told me there was nothing that could be done, and that would have saved me so much heartache and heartbreak and multiple jobs lost and leaving school if I had just been able to get connected with the ESA program earlier in the beginning.
We moved the slides around a little bit, so sorry about that, Michael. But
oh, that's okay. The psychosis experience is isolating, and it's important for folks to have opportunities to speak with others and share their experience. For me, it made such an impact just to see somebody who, when I first entered the program, to see somebody who was closer to graduating and to see them living on their own and going towards their goals. Because at first I was somebody who thought that my life was just kind of over. And to be able to connect with others and to share that experience really made it seem doable, and it made it not seem as scary. And the ESA program also helped me to understand what exactly a diagnosis meant and what helps me to overcome the stigma that I experienced just because of what society told me about that diagnosis. And then when you're looking at the clinical high risk, especially here in our program, one thing that we're trying to do is to be careful about the language that we're using, because it's also coupled with our ESA program. We're trying to be thoughtful about the word psychosis and what that could mean for folks who are in the clinical high-risk program, because that's not something that they're currently experiencing. But then to give them that label could alter or affect kind of their path. With the clinical high risk, it's uncertain how the condition will progress. You know, for some folks, they could never experience psychosis, and for other folks, they might. And then that's when we transition them into the support of the ESA program. The onset of psychosis affects youth and families in a lot of different ways. You start to see the emerging symptoms coming on, and so for me, you know, that looks like at work, hearing people talking about me, having strange experiences at home and at school, and that led to changes in my performance and behavior, and ultimately led me to leaving my job because of the paranoia that I experienced, which then goes into feedback loops with fear, conflict, consequences, role pressure. You know, I'm seeing my friends and other peers starting to succeed more, and I'm not able to do so. And then there's the increasing stress and isolation. And I got to a point where I didn't even feel comfortable to leave my room, and it just creates a cycle.
So thank you so much for sharing that experience. And I think that as we engage people, it's really important to kind of understand what this common early experience is during that clinical high risk period. That generally the young people and the family members are really trying to use their resources to do their best, and and it's not really working. So the things that worked before are not working. That leads to a lot of conflict that then can be used to kind of blame people. So folks come in where they're really trying because they really care, and then that conflict gets interpreted as the cause of the problem. And it is kind of a complex cycle, but that compassion and that strengths orientation becomes so important. And then both the individual and the family often are really struggling with grief, with kind of fear about what's going to happen, what is happening. And then in that early stage also, suicidality is much more common than if people are not experiencing those kinds of symptoms. So we have to be watching for that as well. So in our early psychosis programs, we're really trying to shift that cycle so that as people are starting to have those early symptoms, starting to develop the paranoia, or starting to have hallucinatory or perceptual experiences that are kind of creating new problems for them. We want to be there quickly in a way that is really focused on the things that are causing issues for them. Again, strengths-oriented, supporting them through problem solving, providing kind of non-invasive care where we're not giving them negative messages, and then helping to support them to keep that job or to not get kicked out of school, and normalizing their experience, giving them the opportunity to meet other people who have had similar experiences, validating what they bring in terms of their strengths and their resilience, keeping the person in control of their situation, and kind of slowing things down, kind of step by step. So hopefully in the end, we're really reducing the stress, we're reducing the isolation, and ultimately the symptoms become less of an issue, and they don't lose that social network. And I don't think we can actually get there without really meaningful participatory decision making. So, that doesn't mean inviting somebody to a committee meeting. It doesn't mean kind of hanging their art in the hallway. It means a really serious commitment at the highest level of the organization, and for each individual who's doing this kind of practice, to have a genuine reciprocal partnership where you are recognizing that lived experience is actually your guiding, is what guides what you do. It is important as we bring people into participatory decision-making roles that in spite of our enthusiasm, that we are also careful about really keeping people in a power position where they don't feel pushed to do things that they're not ready to do. We've certainly learned the hard way a few times where we've had folks. We had one person who volunteered to be interviewed by a newspaper, and the newspaper article was really horrendous and really damaging, I think. Likewise, people are not necessarily ready to go to the legislature and testify, or to even speak publicly. And so, just really giving people the opportunity to think about what level of involvement do they want to have, how publicly do they want to participate, it is really important. And then also, when we first really went down this road in earnest, starting around 2010, one of the people who was coaching us around it actually encouraged us to slow down a little bit, because he said, you're not actually ready to respond. So this is, as we think about, responding to the folks who are, who have lived experience, and that includes a whole range of experiences. It includes, immigration issues and, LGBTQ issues and, various kinds of experiences with the mental health system and symptoms and, that sort of thing. We have to really be ready to change and to engage people in a way where we're actually going to do what they say we should do. And so there are going to be times where they're going to really push us to do something that is a lot of work or is just plain inconvenient. And at that point, we shouldn't even be asking the question. So, so in terms of who participates, so with the ESA program, what we've done is, sometimes we have focus groups where we combine young adults and family members, but, for our leadership councils, we intentionally decided that we were going to have a separate youth and family council because they really have very, very different voices, very different concerns. And at one point, our young adult council debated whether to allow families to participate, and they decided resoundingly that the answer was no, because this was a place where they were kind of separating from their families. And so recognizing that there is that inherent tension, but also both of those voices are incredibly important. So, Angela?
Thanks, Tamara. So in terms of engaging families, I've mentioned earlier that having the support of the family is imperative, because they're not going to go away even when the insurance coverage lapses or the funding goes away or a youth stops engaging in treatment. And for good or bad, they're there forever. And just to think about the fact that one of your best roles can be to bring different family members together, help them see different perspectives and make collective decisions, and help them understand when and how to evaluate whether a decision needs to be revisited. And I'm saying this because, for example, I was faced with a hospital staff who asked about housing. And my son said he had a place to live. He was renting from me. And she took that at face value and said, okay, she couldn't help with housing, and that sounded like a great solution. And she never checked with me to understand the reality. And I find that this is not uncommon. And the reality for me was that my son had been renting, and he had, during a period of psychosis, built an illegal structure on the house. There were calls that I kept getting from the city, and a lien placed on my house, which kept growing in cost. He removed cabinets from the kitchen. He smashed the stove with a sledgehammer. When I got in, the fridge was filled with rotting food. He had stopped flushing toilets. He was growing pot. So it cost me well over $20,000 to sort of rehabilitate my house. So that's a piece of the scenario that nobody asked me about that caused incredible stress on me, and also on my son, frankly. And then secondarily, there was the whole question of, well, do I fix up the house and continue to have my son live there, or do I really tell him he needs to live somewhere else and help him find other housing? And to be honest, I had very important people to me in my life, people I greatly respected, who had very different perspectives on what would be best for my son. And, I'm a mom. I just want the best for my baby, even though he's a grown young man. And it was so incredibly hard to wrestle with not knowing what to do. And what would have been incredibly helpful would be to have, programs, clinicians actually help people understand that there isn't necessarily a right answer. There's simply decisions to be made, and to be able to map out, a decision tree and what does that look like, and how will we revisit it? How will we know if this was a good choice to make or not? Whether it's housing, whether it's a medication, whether it's therapy, whatever it is, understanding that you have options and that you can make calculated risks, and being that together, not letting one person, whether it's a youth, whether it's a family member, hold that all on their own shoulders is just really important. And once you start opening up that dialogue to really understand what are people fully dealing with, you really start to create an honesty in the dialogue that's about how do we make collective decisions that are going to work for everybody. They may be imperfect, but they're what we can do. So I'll stop there, Tamara.
Great. So, these are obviously really difficult decisions, and I think you're talking about kind of the different levels of engagement, and part of it is about really kind of reaching out to families, listening, meeting people with where they're at, really kind of recognizing that when we assume, oh good, the family's there, they're going to step in and take care of things, sometimes that is a really incredibly difficult situation that we're putting them in, and so having that shared decision making is incredibly important. I'm wondering from the group, are there practices that you all have found that have been particularly effective in reducing power imbalances with young people and family members?
Hi, this is Caitlin. So I think that something that I found to be really effective is when young people and families feel like that there's somebody on their team who they can really align with. So examples that I've seen of this have been primarily in peer support, but I know that not every agency has those roles. But I think it's really important that youth and families, while they feel like there is a safe space for them to participate in decision-making together, also feel like that they have people on their teams that they can sort of bond with and engage with one-on-one, and then that person can help support them in the participatory decision-making process.
Yeah, so that gets into the whole role of peer support generally, which has been largely missing from a lot of the early psychosis work, but is starting to emerge more centrally. Are there other practices that folks have found across the network that you think have really helped with help connecting with families and young adults at a level of partnership? Anybody feel like they've done a really good job with it? I see Lisa typing. Okay. All right, so we'll come back to this conversation. So, Angela, do you want to talk about the let's see. We're kind of starting to get into some conversations about resources here, and this was a slide that Michael was originally going to cover, but basically it's kind of different levels of decision making. Michael, you want to go over this real quick?
Yeah, certainly. So this is a graphic by Neb Jones that, like you said, talks about peer involvement and leadership. So you look at like program development, policy, and planning, and direct service delivery. So having peer support specialists on the team to share and their experience, public outreach and engagement. So with our team, have had the opportunity to go and speak at different local events and talk about our program, doing community outreach, clinician education, and so I've also had not only been the recipient of a lot of different educations and trainings, but had the opportunity to be a part of locally and nationally trainings where I've worked to talk about the ESA program, and then also quality improvement, evaluation, and research. And I think it's so important to have somebody with lived experience on a quality improvement type of setting, because I think that people can have really good intentions and come up with something that seems really good on paper, but without somebody who's been there and had that experience, there might be something that was missed that they didn't think about.
Thanks, Michael. And I think as we've been continuing to engage people at all these different levels, one of the things that's starting to happen is, in addition to pushing us to do what we do better, the young adults and families are kind of pushing us into some different spheres that we might not have gone into otherwise. One area that comes up almost always that Michael mentioned before was community ed. The young adults consistently talk about the importance of us getting out into high school classes and really changing the way high school students are informed. The other areas where we're really being pushed to kind of go down some roads we might not have gone down otherwise are the experiences that people have in higher education, where they're being asked to advocate in ways that they're not necessarily prepared for. and then the experiences that people are having in emergency rooms in particular, but also hospitals, where they're having a lot of trauma. They're really, they're coming into us kind of recovering from some of those experiences. And then, the young adult leadership folks, as they've looked at our practice guidelines around transition, have added a whole litany of skills that people need to develop around things like budgeting and, renting and transportation and all those things. That now, we're looking at program development that we might not have ever even considered doing before, and really thinking about, what types of long-term supports people need. So, from that direct involvement with young adults, it's really pushing our program development and the need for us to engage around broader systems. So, Bradley is saying we're struggling to be able to hear the conversation. Oh, okay. So it sounds like we're having some issues with sound. So let's see if we can get a sense of how many people are having that problem. Okay. All right. So we are recording it, so if folks are having difficulty hearing, you'll be able to listen to hopefully a better version of it. Angela, do you want to talk about the work that Nami has been doing around these issues?
Sure. So in 2016, Nami published a report on engagement. And for those of you who are sighing inwardly at the word report, I do too. But I just want to say that it's a very quick read, and it's incredibly empowering. We brought together a wide range of individuals with lived experience, as well as family members and practitioners who all shared really valuable perspectives on the importance of making engagement the new standard of care. And they reached consensus around 12 principles. I'll just focus on a few of them. They'll all show up on your screen. And really at its core, communicating hope and treating people with respect and dignity using a strengths-based approach. If you do nothing else, those can literally change lives. They're so fundamental to helping individuals and families feel like they can get through all this and succeed. And I just want to mention that one of the things that happened when my son was seeing a psychiatrist, and he was struggling, I was struggling, but his doctor said, I know it's going to be a very difficult path, Angela, but I have your back. You can call me day or night. And those were the best words I could ever hear in my life. I felt supported. I felt like somebody understood, and just feeling that sense of support made me feel able to handle what I had to deal with ahead. And I think that's what's so powerful about clinical high-risk and early psychosis programs is their ability to help families and youth see the light at the end of the tunnel, and to recognize that they have enormous strengths and bring so much, and they don't need to be defined by a diagnosis. And I want to mention, too, that one of the things we're finding out from science is that there's more and more signals of cognitive changes in the brain, various biomarkers that are validating risk. But even in the absence of so-called biomarkers and researchers' ability to test what's going on, families and youth know what's going on. So, for example, if questioned, I could talk at a very young age about my son's challenges with processing speed, which he processed more slowly than other people, even though he was very intelligent. He had challenges with reading and writing, but he had incredible visual skills. He was bothered by things like labels and too many lights and too many people. But, you know, we found sort of organically our own ways of working with those differences. Things like when he was younger, not going shopping except for at 7 p.m. at night on Monday nights for a maximum of 20, 30 minutes, you know, things like warm baths and reading good books together. When you ask families and youth about things they do that help, you have an opportunity to let them know that they actually already have signs of incredible resilience, and they can draw on this capacity throughout their lives. Now I'll kind of chat about, you know, a couple other aspects of our 12 principles of engagement in this report, which actually is written in such an easy-to-read way and focuses on different people's experiences. So I find it incredibly invaluable. And one of the sort of, in my mind, obvious principles of engagement is to shape services and supports around an individual's life goals. And I think Tamara was mentioning this, and it's so valid. You know, people aren't interested in treatment. They're interested in life. They want help getting to work. They want help with housing. They want to know about dating, taking care of themselves, their diet. So being adaptable and meeting people where they are and what they need in the moment is so key. And I'm struck, I mean, obviously providing opportunities for people to include family and other close supporters as key partners in their journey is incredible. And I want to mention that think of the family in a much more holistic way. I'm struck by a family that I worked with ages ago where there was a challenge with, you know, who could take care of this young woman after school. And she had a lot of challenges, but one of her strengths was she was incredibly patient and kind with her grandfather, who was blind. And the initial response of, you know, clinicians was like, oh, a blind grandfather can't take care of this, you know, very aggressive young woman, but they gave it a try, and it turned out to work incredibly well. And I think when you hold the space open to explore a larger family, family friends, etc., and consider the gifts, the talents, the strengths that each person can bring to the table and how you can use that to mitigate challenges in dynamics, I just think that's really important. And I also want to mention that the more that people know and understand about what they're dealing with, the more in control they feel, and the more they can feel like they can regain their own lives. And I do want to say that NAMI does have a lot of programs that help people sort of know more about brain conditions, and we have some newer versions that are quicker, easier to connect with. So, for example, NAMI Family and Friends. There's also our more traditional NAMI Family to Family course, and all of these help people connect with other people who've been there, done that. We also have a program called NAMI Basics that's for families of youth. And then we have a lot of peer support groups, including for peers who are living with mental health conditions like NAMI Connection. A lot of different terms to remember, and I would just say reach out to your local NAMI, see if that's a good fit, because having a connection to somebody else who's walked in your shoes is so important. And as Michael mentioned earlier, I mean, peer supports are an incredibly important part, I believe, of the recovery journey. So if you can incorporate them into your programs, I would just say that that is a really wonderful thing that you can do. I think with that, I'll just turn it back over to Tamara. And I just want to mention that the URL for our engagement report was on the previous slides. We also at NAMI have resources on early psychosis, and the URL is on your screen.
Great, thank you so much. And you know, it's interesting. I just got a question about you know, how to work with families where they don't believe that their young person is able to be successful. So you may want to come back to that in the conversation as we move forward. So we have Caitlin online, and then Janet there to kind of add in. Do you want to talk about the YVAL and YVOC, and I'll come back to the Duncan Miller.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of tools that are helpful for increasing participatory decision-making, and especially just making sure that your agency has a culture of incorporating youth voice, are the YVAL and the YVOC. So the YVAL stands for the youth voice at the agency level. This is a validated tool that was created by Janet as well as some partners that we have at Youth Move National. And really it helps folks determine how well their agency incorporates youth voice at all levels. Then based off of the YVAL, we created the YVOC, which stands for Youth Voice on Committees and Councils. And that is really more focused on how do we really meaningfully incorporate youth voice at big decision-making bodies. So we were talking a little bit earlier about how when we're talking about incorporating youth and family voice, you need to make sure that that's at all levels. So these tools are really helping you assess at the higher level, how are you adequately including youth voice? And one thing that I just want to mention, while these evaluations are really focused on how to incorporate youth voice, there is a team currently that's working on one specific to family voice on committees and councils, because that's very important as well. So when we were developing the youth voice at the agency level, as well as the youth voice on committees and councils, the evaluation was broken up into some major themes, and then under each theme we have specific items that I think were really pretty helpful and pretty clear on what folks needed to have in place in order to be approaching that theme. So some of the 8 critical themes that you can see here are things like overall vision and commitment, collaborative approach, empowered representatives, commitment to facilitation and support of youth and young adult participation. We have also workforce development and engagement, participation in developing programming, participation in evaluation, leading initiatives. We went, even as detailed as that how are young people even making decisions about agency funding, agency policies, things that are really going to be affecting things at the practice level as well. So again, this is one of those higher level tools for making sure that you're incorporating the client voice really at all levels within your agency, within policy making, as well as on their teams as they're being served.
Okay, thank you, Caitlin. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I was just going.
Go on.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, what I was just going to say, is there anything else that you guys would like to add?
So one thing that I just want to add is that if folks are interested in learning more about the youth voice at the agency level, that is something that they can access through us or through Youth Move National. Also, we are currently doing the validation study for the youth voice on committees and councils. And if folks are interested in learning more about that or they sit on a decision-making body or group that might be interested in participating in that validation study, I would encourage them to reach out to us.
Great, thank you. Janet, anything that you would add? Okay, I'll take that as a no. I think that there's also another tool, right, developed by the Friedla Group, by the Family-Run Executive Directors Association, that kind of mirrors this. And I think it's just being piloted right now. I don't know if anybody online knows about that. Okay. So in terms of resources, another good one that we use quite a lot is the, Scott Miller's work, the Duncan Miller stuff around outcome rating scales and session rating scales, and feedback-informed treatment. A very simple, direct way of asking people for feedback that is not only driven by people's perspective, but also has a quantitative aspect that's really helpful. And there's lots of information out there about that, and training. I know folks use other tools as well, like the Acorn. Again, we definitely recommend Nev Jones' documents, and there's a number of really great resources available from the National Association of State Mental Health Program Directors, and Dave Shern is also online right now. So Dave, I don't know if there's anything that you might add, that if you want to throw anything into the chat box in terms of specific resources I recommend in addition to the work that Nev has done. There's a really good article that relates back to the YVAL and the YVOC on the Pathways website. And then our ESA website also has a number of resources that are specifically for families and young adults. So there's a fair amount out there, but we still have a ways to go as far as really kind of having robust participation at the national level on calls such as this one. So, and of course, we are always encouraging people to join PEPNet if you haven't. The Psychosis Risk and Early Psychosis Prevention Network, that's a great place to connect with other folks nationally. So with that, there were a number of questions that came up, and I'm interested. I'm going to kind of walk my way through a few of those, and feel free to add both ideas and questions to the chat. I want to start with a question about how do you approach a family where the family may actually really be not believing that the person is able to be successful, and really kind of pushing towards guardianship and disability. Angela and Michael, I don't know if you have any suggestions, and also I want to open this up to the whole group as well, if you want to add to the chat.
Sure, I can add. Just yesterday, I met with someone, a teen whose mom was talking about the idea of having the teen on disability, and newer to our program, and just as when I entered the ESA program, my mom asked the same thing. So do we go on disability now? And what the clinician said to me and what I said to this family is, we try not to encourage people to go on disability right away, and to work towards goals that they might have, or to try and work towards a job, or trying to dispel the belief that a person has to be on disability.
Yeah, and this is Angela, and of course every family is different, but I think one thing that's important is to assume good intent of all families. And I think families are running through so many questions in their mind, everything from how is my child ever going to have an income that's going to sustain them? Will they be able to get the treatment they need in times when, they have a lot of symptoms? And often they're not talked with as though there's an opportunity to actually plan for their worst case scenario, their best case scenario, and something in between. Instead, they, families are picking up information wherever they can, and oftentimes they're hearing, oh, well, you need to apply for disability, or you need a commitment hearing in order to get treatment, etc. And I guess my approach, although it's not going to always work, is to not necessarily take people literally, but to listen and ask for what are the hopes and fears that underline that request or that comment. And part of it, too, is helping families adjust to a new normal and really starting to consider what would represent a step forward for them, or what would result in less stress for themselves. Just helping families grapple with the various options and knowing that nothing's written in stone and you can revisit it is so helpful.
Great, thank you. I don't know if there are other ideas around this one. I think that, like you're saying, I mean, it's not, an either-or kind of thing. And, it is challenging sometimes for families to see the hope, especially if they've had a number of crises and, they really see their young person struggling and there are financial constraints that are, where they're really having to be concerned about the person's survival and well-being. So I think that, really focusing in on that kind of shared decision-making where you get everybody in the same room and you look at, kind of what are the goals, So, one goal is kind of to be able to support yourself financially, to be able to live on your own, that kind of thing. And then, using a kind of a structured approach to looking at, okay, what are the different options, what are the pros and cons of that option, and, going on disability or gaining guardianship is not necessarily always the worst thing in the world long term. I mean, people do make those decisions, and they still work their way through it. I mean, I've had folks who are doing internships and things like that for us who are on disability. I've had people graduate from college while they're on disability, so, but then they just need support to kind of work their way beyond, to the point where they are actually able to kind of, participate fully. And again, to the degree that you have access to consultation or peer support folks who can help talk through those situations, maybe benefits counselors, those folks can be really helpful as well. So some of the other questions that have come up are, what if sites, so suggestions around working with Hispanic families. So, one of the things that I think is really important here is, really looking at the composition of your team. Is your team kind of representative of who's in your community? Because there's definitely a really important issue of understanding and trust, being able to relate to the folks who are providing services. So I think we found that the programs that have done the best generally with Hispanic families have Hispanic staff, and recognizing that there isn't like one culture there, that really it's extremely diverse. When we talk about Hispanic families, we have kind of a really wide range of folks. And Michael, I don't know if you have anything that you would add from your experience in Lane or Angela?
Okay, this is Angela. So in my experience, obviously it helps if you can have practitioners that share the culture of the families that you're working with. But absent that, because, that's not always the case, one thing that's just critical is simply respect and dignity and meeting people where they're at. And to me, that is some of the most culturally competent things you can do. And part of that is using language that's really pretty universal. And I'll just give an example. When a crisis team came, when my son was having a crisis, the behavioral health professional on the mobile crisis team didn't say, oh, it looks like you have rapid cycling bipolar disorder with psychotic features. Let's get you to a hospital. Instead, she very gently, after questioning him a bit, said, it sounds like your head hurts and you'd really like to get some sleep. Is that right? And he said, yes. And she said, would you be willing to go with me to the hospital? Because I think we could help you get some sleep there. And that kind of approach, helping people talk about what they're experiencing and how it's impacting them, that's what helps engage families regardless of their culture. It's about seeing people where they are, helping them talk about what's affecting them.
Yeah. Great. So I think what you're talking about is really understanding how the person is thinking about the situation and using language that they feel comfortable with. We really encourage the use of the cultural formulation interviews. There's a kind of a primary assessment tool, and then kind of a set of supplements that provide some questions that you might not otherwise ask. And I think beyond that, really being willing to do outreach into the community rather than expecting people to come to you. I think often, particularly if folks are immigrants from somewhere else, they may have some real distrust of the institutions, and so reaching out, trying to build relationships in the community where you can be introduced by someone who they might trust. Being involved in those communities actively, and then just being really sensitive to the concerns, the very real concerns that they have about how they might interact with the kind of institutions. So I think that's a really important and large conversation that we should definitely circle back to. It also kind of ties into this next question, which is what have sites done to address transportation issues in engaging family and youth? And again, I'd really open that up to folks to share strategies that they have used. Transportation is obviously a huge issue, and in rural communities in particular, it can be an even bigger issue if you don't have a good bus system and that kind of thing. Definitely, having people who are available to coach people around the use of public transportation, figuring out what's available in the community, and often there are like bus passes and things that the programs make available. But also, I think outreach just can't be replaced. So we find generally that to engage most of our young adults and family members, that we have to go to them. That we can't rely on them to get to us, both because of transportation and also just how difficult it is to get from one place to the other. Sometimes it's even a kind of cognitive issue or a sensory issue. So we start off with the presumption that we have to go to their home, which in the end I think is really helpful as well, because we engage with people in their home. And get to know them at a different kind of level because of that. Okay, let's see. And anything else, Michael? Anything that you would add to either?
Well, I think the ability to in another sense, meet people where they're at makes all the difference. I've driven 30, 45 minutes to meet somebody at their house, or at the park nearby, or where they really feel the most comfortable, especially when transportation issues are an issue. And I think back to my experience, when I first entered into the ESA program, and somebody I didn't even know who they were just came to my door, and they're like, "Hi, I'm from the ESA program," and I was like, "Okay, this is great."
Yeah, so I think it's just kind of a culture, and Joanna mentions that you have a few parents whose children have been in the program for a long time, have expressed interest in providing a sort of kind of peer-to-peer support to new families. We've had that same experience with young adults as well, that our Young Adult Leadership Council actually intentionally took on the kind of greeting new people. They weren't able to do it physically through a peer support kind of approach, but they developed a website specifically for new people coming in, which is introduced by a peer. So Joanna was asking, could you provide any suggestions or resources in regards to family peer support and families supporting new families? Angela, do you have any ideas, or other folks online have any ideas about that one?
So, Tamara, can you repeat that just one more time?
So family-to-family support. So Joanna from Rhode Island was saying that she's got some parents who really want to support new people in the program in a kind of a peer support role. And so she's wondering if there are any resources in regard to maybe supporting her program and facilitating that.
That's a fantastic question, and it's actually really exciting to hear that families want to support other families. And I think that was actually the basis of NAMI from so many years ago. And a lot of our programs do that, like family to family. So there's an opportunity to have families sort of train in some of our existing programs and then offer those through the program. But another approach might be to engage families in as a sense, sort of peer navigators and in informal peer supports that isn't in the structure of a formal program like that NAMI already has. I'm not thinking off the top of my head of any structure that does that latter. So far in terms of like being a training or a structure. But I think that's something we could talk about, and I would just encourage that caller to contact us at NAMI to discuss what might be possible.
So Angela, if they wanted to contact you at NAMI, how would they reach you?
Just email me at akimball@nami.org.
And I know that there are some early psychosis programs out there that have integrated family peer support. So we may be able to connect up with some of them and see if they can offer if they've developed training or job descriptions, that kind of thing. So Joanna, we could probably connect you to some of those programs. It's a great question and a really exciting opportunity. As I mentioned, we have a Family Leadership Council now that's literally brand new. It's only been meeting for a few months. And what they did right off the bat is that they've created a listserv and a newsletter where every new family coming into the program will automatically be given the opportunity to subscribe. And so it's just a way for them to be able to reach out to each other, and it's just a starting place. But thinking about how to reduce that isolation from the beginning. We also had a focus group a while back with a group of fathers, and it was really interesting because they were saying that one of the things that they would like developed is father-to-father peer support. And they were saying that they felt like there were some issues that that they had dealt with that were a little different in terms of the expectations and the grief process, and it took them a little longer to come on board, and they felt like they would have been able to hear it better from another father. So I think this is a really great area for program development. Melissa, thank you. Yeah, go on. Mm-hmm.
This is Angela, and I just wanted to add that, consider the use of texting. Even a short text from somebody else who's been in the program, a fellow parent, would be just amazing. The amount of isolation can't be overstated, and even the simplest reach outs is so empowering to people.
Yeah, and I think as you think about that participatory decision making again, as you hand people your introductory materials, or think about what's on your website, even a message just from like one other person who's been part of the program can really give a different kind of message. And Cindy's saying we've developed grandparent networking, as we have a lot of youth who are being raised by their grandparents. Different issues, concerns, and strengths. Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting. I think, Cindy, people would be really interested in learning more. So if you and other folks online, wanted to post in the learning management system chat, we'll try to share information that folks have developed. Going back to that transportation issue, Melissa was saying that the program is in the community. We meet clients in their homes or preferred location. We also provide transportation for medication management. Yeah, so just right in line with what people generally have to do to make these programs work. And Cindy, thank you for providing your email information. So for folks who are interested in getting more information from Cindy, go ahead and email her directly. And then Cindy, if you might also be able to email me the information, more information about what you're doing, I'll try to make sure that it gets shared with the group. Again, if there are folks online who have resources that they would like to share, or questions that you feel like we haven't quite delved into, or scenarios that come up where you're struggling, this community is a really great resource. So I want to just say before we end that there is an evaluation at the end, and we want to be sure that everyone fills that out. So please do that. And are there any other questions or things that people want to add before we move on? And I see that Deborah is typing, so we'll hold on for a few minutes. And so will the slides be available for printing? Yes, and you can actually download the slides right now from the screen. So just below the chat box, there's a you'll see that there's a file section, and you just click on it, and you can actually download it right now. Also, we will be, as I said, posting the whole webinar along with the copies of the slides, and we'll upload any additional resources that come in. The nice thing about the learning management system is it gives us a place to post things where we can come back to them going forward. One of the things we haven't talked about quite as much is the difference, if we're doing individual peer support or family peer support, kind of the difference between first episode and clinical high risk. And so I think if people are doing peer support, it's going to be important to educate them about those distinctions, so that they're kind of thinking about what they say and how they say it, because folks coming in clinical high risk may never develop psychosis, and so families may tend to speak more about their own experience, which may be a little different. So really, giving people a good orientation and training is going to be important as well. So thank you, Tiara, for putting the link to the evaluation there, and the slides again are available. Any other questions or comments that people want to add? Have people found this to be helpful, or do you still feel like you're, have you found stuff that you think you might that might change the way that you approach the work that you're doing? So, how confident do people feel in their ability to go out there and engage young adults and family members in participation at this point? Great. Bradley, amazing. I can't wait to re-listen to the presentation. Great. Thank you. Very helpful. Great. Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot to this, and so it's, we don't want to get, we want to make sure that we're covering the broad territory, and just kind of encouraging people to go down this road. But I think we're all learning as we go, and I feel like I'm just really learning every day. I never quite get it right, which I think is part of what happens when you get good. You start really engaging. Cindy, great presentation. We're working continuously to get better at engagement. Yep, me too. So what I would challenge all of us to do is think about, as we go forward with these presentations, if you, as you're talking to young adults and family members, encouraging them to join the learning community and to frame questions from their perspective that they think would be helpful. I'd like to see a much more